Over the weekend, Nottingham Forest won, Arsenal 0 was a result. Breathe it in, Nottingham Forest fans. To that end, Kieran Shannon of the Irish Examiner, amongst other things, is with us. Hi, Kieran.
Hi, Joe.
I heard Tom Dunn, I chuckled to myself, Tom Dunn, our brilliant colleague here on News Talk, he was chatting on the radio last week, described himself as a long-suffering Manchester United fan. And, well, he ain't got nothing on you. So, Nottingham Forest, dear oh dear. You were just unlucky, really, to have been impressionable at a certain period in time. And ever since then, it's been a weight around your neck.
Yeah, I mean, I happened to write about it. That's probably where the way you picked up the phone to me after yesterday was I marked a significant birthday, which you could tell what it was by I declared that I'm Nottingham Forest supporter, right? I mean, people a few years older than me would be probably Leeds fans, because in the early 70s or late 60s, Leeds were getting to FA Cup finals and always contending. I was 6.5, Joe, when my first World Cup that I would have seen was on, Argentina 78. And what's the first game after a World Cup? The Charity Shield. And I distinctly remember, so Ipswich had won the FA Cup, Nottingham Forest had won the league first year up from first division, or from, what was then, the second division. And we were actually moving house. My parents would be from the north. I was born in Belfast. We were moving from Dublin again to go down south, further south. And Martin O'Neill, I had played a bit of Gaelic and soccer that summer, and my father talked about this Martin O'Neill, who was from the north, who played football as well as soccer, and he got 2 goals that day. And from that day, he was my man and they were my team. And Forest, Julie, 2 weeks later, or about 3 weeks later, met Liverpool. Back then, it was you had to either win the European Cup, which Liverpool had done the previous year, or win the league. There was no second, third or fourth doing it. And Forest and Liverpool met in the first round, and Forest beat them 2-0. I was just hooked on them, and Forest went on to win that European Cup and the following year, and they were winning League Cups and getting to League Cup finals, because look, Clough was at his absolute magisterial zenith. And while there was a little bit of dip, there was the first time I saw Forest in action was Paddy Mulligan's testimonial in the old, well, it's still old, the kind of Daily Mount, 1980. The pre-season, Forest had Birtles was gone to United. There was Forest would. He was so good in the transfer market. He was good at getting players. Like he identified Birtle after Peter With was moved on, but then he got 2 or 3 signings. We had forwards like Justin Fashanu, Ian Wallace, Peter Ward, and none of them really happened. But Forest were still a top 5, top 6 team, and then got back to being a top 3 or 4 team. And look, even in the rest of the 80s, we had it really good. And the late 80s, early 90s. We were a top 3 team, played the 2 FA Cup semi-finals, including Hillsborough 89 against Liverpool. We were winning League Cups. Obviously, Roy came along then. But then just, like I always remember seeing the first ever game Sky showed live when they got the contract was Forest and Liverpool. And Forest won 1-0. I remember distinctly watching. I said, Jesus, this could be the year we win the league. That was the year we got relegated. Because Sheringham, Clough, was a little on the wane, and that was the time of the whole envelopes, and George Graham and a few other boys were involved. And but long story short, Teddy Sheringham wanted to move back to London, where he had a child, and he was sold. And Forest's answer to it, and it just still echoes in infamy through history, is they bought a guy eventually called Robert Rosario from Norwich, who was he was no Teddy bloody Sheringham anyway, and we got relegated. So while we had players, like the term you'll hear a lot is too good to go down. That was, I think, that term was coined with Forest in 92, 93, but we weren't good enough to stay up when we were relegated. But bounced up, got Collymore with the Keane money. Keane and Nigel Clough were Clough didn't work really well for Liverpool. But obviously Roy was, we got 3.75 million, which seems like pittance now, but was the transfer record at the time. And with that money bought Collymore, and Collymore was sensational for those 2 first years. And but then he moved on to Liverpool, and a couple of years later we were relegated, got back up immediately after. But then there was that whole Van Hooijdonk controversy. He downed tools, and it was a weak enough squad, and got relegated in the 98-99 season. And little did we know that was the last of the Premiership days. And I've only been over the City Ground a few times. The first time was actually, it was around this time 6 years ago. I was over for a midweek game. I just happened to be over in that part of England, and I saw Forest were playing QPR, went to Lawn, and it was just striking seeing, I don't know if there's another stadium or place that just has history nearly weighing down. It's the Peter Taylor stand, it's the Brian Clough stand. You have those big emblems of the European Cups, and you were just looking at, there was a big crowd, 18,000 there in midweek when Forest were only mid-table, even below that season. And you're just looking at all these people in their, let's say, mid-late 20s, and you're saying they really haven't seen Forest in the Premiership. And that was 6 years ago. So I got very excited, Joe, when I wrote that piece. We lost our subsequent 2 games. I jinxed them again, I was thinking, but a good day yesterday, and maybe we can make a push to get promotion and finally get back up there.
Because I saw you make a point in that piece you wrote just before Christmas. Since Brian Clough bade a tearful farewell to the Trent End and Barry Davies, Forest have gone through 26 managers and at least 7 other caretakers in the subsequent 28 years. So it's been an unmitigated disaster on that front. What's it like for you as a fan based in Ireland of a club which drift away from the limelight? Like, I get you talk about the supporters there in their mid-20s and then the older supporters as well who remember the good old days. They have that match-going experience outlet. For the Manchester United, Liverpool fans here, it's very much a television event, but I mean it's a big television event, and that's their way of staying in touch with the club and having a real affinity and feel for the club and the players. How does that work when you're a Nottingham Forest fan over the last 15, 20 years? Does it ebb away slightly, the love?
Yeah, it does. Look, I mean, I won't claim to be, the most zealous of a Nottingham Forest supporter. I wouldn't be able to rattle off, the teams that Forest 1 to 11 of the Forest teams of the last 15 years, the way I would have been able to tell you every single team from 78 to 2005 or so. Because
it's impossible, I would presume, to stay in touch, really.
Yeah, because other things have to take a priority. And I remember at one stage, my colleague Malachy Clerkin often laughed at it. At one stage, he was asking me, was I still as obsessed with Forest? And I said, well, they seem to have given up, interest. So maybe I'm at the same point. But of course you're still looking out for that result, and it's still there's that adrenaline shot. And, part of the problem, as you said, that the turnover of managers has been ridiculous, and going for the messianic big name appointment, the great man appointment. But there are times where you do get excited, even, like when Stuart Pearce got, came back. I mean, Pearce took over from Frank Clark, who was the guy who succeeded Clough. But, he came back in 2014, 2015, but didn't last the season again. You go through different... And it's just been ridiculous, Joe, though. The amount of times where it looks like they're making a good promotion push. Like I remember in, let's say, 2012, 2013, we're only a point outside the playoffs. Sean O'Driscoll was over the team. And on New Year's, on Stephen's Day, 1-4-2 against Leeds, and was sacked, the next day, just when a point outside the playoffs. It has been the model of instability. I mean, we will look, as you mentioned, Tom was talking about long-suffering Man United fans. My sports editor is Tony Lean, who would now be described as a long-suffering Arsenal fans. But as you said, they've got nothing on Forest, because Forest, Daniel Taylor, who's another long-suffering Forest fan and a hardcore Forest fan as well, as being obviously one of the best writers on the sport, has written some great stuff in The Athletic, and he's talked about just the culture that has been off there. The turnover has been ridiculous, but let's say over the last decade you had the Kuwaiti owners, and then the last 5 years you've had the Greek owners, and you have to say that at least they've had ambition, but huge short-termism of you have had players, such a stockpile unwanted players. One manager comes in, he doesn't want these players, and he starts buying, but then he's gone, and the next manager inherits these players that he doesn't want. And you like there's a room in the club where Daniel has talked about how, you know, it's called the departure lounge, because once you go in, you're going to be moved out again. And it comes down, you've had a departure lounge, because that's basically what the dugout has been for whoever the manager is. So Cooper finally looks to be just that right fit of, while Forest, you would think, have had, like, let's say Chris Hughton seemed to be someone who had a track record of getting promoted, dignified, stable, steady guy, has seen it all, but just maybe has, sometimes a guy just has gone beyond that peak of being at their powers. Cooper is just on it. He knows the division. He's coached at the top level, as in with the English, you know, Ben Foden, Trent Arnold-Alexander, when they were coming through the English system. He had Swansea in the playoffs, you know, when their budget was much smaller than what Forest would be, which is why he finally stepped out and cashed his chips. But like it finally, and the big thing that they've done is the Greek owners have taken a bit more of a step back in terms of managing and not being as meddlesome. And they brought in Dan Murphy from Barnsley to be sort of the technical director and be overseeing recruitment. And Forest finally seem to have an element of stability and a bit of more common sense, rather than just like it looks like a soap opera the way it's just been going on, of just fishing, getting managers in and out, and just impulsive buy-in. And again, where like you would have had an awful culture in the club with those players just being ostracised. Like the PFA has been into Forest because of how those players have been treated and basically ostracized, where you don't train with the squad. You have to take your gear out of the lockers, and you're moved into another building just to marginalize you, so that you're more willing to maybe get off your contract and be sold on. So Cooper has, while he's only been in 3 months, but I think he'll last more than the year, which has been the average so far, as you said, post Clough.
What are your strongest memories of Clough?
There's just so many. I mean, it was just the belief, I think. I think the belief, you know, it's just funny. You just get, you know, like, it's amazing how it defines, you know, like at Christmas time there, you're going through the different Christmases you've had and the family experiences. I remember Forest drew with Cologne at home 3-3 in the semi-final of the Champions League or European Cup, as it was at the time. So you were going away to Cologne.
What year would that have been, give or take?
This is 79.
Okay.
So, and it looked like, you know, you just don't go over and win away from home. And when, you know, like, they would have to win, obviously. They weren't going to get a 4-4 draw. And it looked like they were gone. And Barry Davis, whoever was interviewing him afterwards, and it was like talking like as if, you know, you're gone here. And I remember Clough saying, hey, we can do this. And I remember being taken. I remember being 7 or 8. And I remember distinctly my mother said, you heard what Brian Clough said? They'll win. I'm telling you, they'll win. And I remember her saying to me, look, you make me breakfast in bed when Forest win this game, right? I said, and I'll always remember it. One of the ingrained memories of that corner kick coming in, and Ian Boyer and the 16-minute heading it, and Forest winning, doing what seemed the impossible, winning 1-0, won the final 1-0, Trevor Francis, and just you know, like how he set the tone right after that game, because Forest had been 2-0 up, and then it was 3-2 down. They made it 3-3, but just the mood afterwards were beaten. And he just had that. I remember talking to Jerry McDermott, the late Jerry McDermott was a statistician analyst with Kildare, and he talked about a Leinster Championship game where Kildare had blown a lead, and it looked like it was a draw against Offaly. They were going into a replay, and Jerry McDermott said, walking into this one, he said, these players are dead. They just think they've blown it. And how O'Dwyer set the tone right there for the replay. And Clough had that natural magnetism as well. But he was great. Like, what he had was an unbelievable respect, actually, for refereeing, which is, you take all the managers we've had since Ferguson, Wenger, Mourinho, constantly, what do they go to? VAR, the rest. Like, I don't think I've ever seen another manager talk so much. They have a very tough job to do. I remember him challenging the match of the day. So he had a bigger picture as well, and just Asher, he like the man management you had, and you'd have to say, like, well, I think sometimes a problem for O'Neill with Ireland and with Forest, but particularly with Ireland, was he latched a little too onto the Cloughieisms, and because like what I'm about to say is, like, he didn't announce his team till 75 minutes before a game, because that's what Clough used to do. But there were times where it was ingenious. The famous one being Roy getting his debut, going into the Liverpool game, Anfield, like just the way that he just identified Keane. So while he was on the way in, and unfortunately he was struggling with the alcohol at that point, like just how he even kept Forest relevant in the late 80s, early 90s, like that, like around that time, like the late 80s, early 90s, you were thinking Forest could still, win the league. Obviously, like Liverpool were, that John Barnes team, like they would say like their best game ever was the 5-0 against Forest, but Forest were the second best team in the country at the time. Like how he just had an ability to bring through players, still identify players, or players come through the system, and he was just but again, just like we're seeing with even Mourinho, who has been compared to Clough with what he did. Like, again, when you look at what Clough did with Derby, but I wouldn't have been as afraid with that until afterwards. But I do think something was broken when he and Taylor finished.
Yeah,
that was the absolute tandem. There's been nothing like them.
Yeah. And one last point. So my earliest memory of him, sadly, I mean, subsequently, obviously, I've seen him in all his glory, but my memory of him is in that relegation season, and clipping a supporter on the pitch and the green jumper, but like very blotchy in the face and not looking healthy, and what a very sad end. Do you remember for in that last year, that 92-93 period, those last years or two, he wasn't hounded out of there? Him and the fans never fell out as such, or did they?
No, because Forest, like in 91, Forest got to the FA Cup final.
Yeah, and you were saying you thought you'd win the league.
Yeah, and like in 92, we got to the League Cup final. United beat us 1-0, but like we were constantly either making League Cup or FA Cup finals, or there was a Simon Zenit Data Cup, which was, so Forest were always going to Wembley in the late 80s, early 90s. So they fell off a cliff.
So it was just a complete shell shock. Complete shell shock in 93.
It would be the equivalent of Leicester City going down now, or even or a club of that, like a team of that stature early. Like in other words, they went from being 7th to 20th, 22nd, I think it was that year.
Right.
So it was like, and again, just like when you didn't replace Sheringham until 4 months later with a Rosario, like that's when it was off. Like there was massive slippage. There had been gradual slippage, but then just that year, and like again, when you let someone like Sheringham go, and the money was big. Like if Forest had stayed in the Premier League, I know they came back up, and we had a couple of those couple of years when Forest came back up. I mean, Clark in his first year got them to 3rd. Like we won in Old Trafford. I was at that game, and it still is one of my best sport memories. Collymore gets a rocket in the top corner.
Yeah.
Ryan Roy was, he was about to drop off at the time, but like that was a very good Forest team that came back up. And Clark obviously was hugely influenced by Clough, but the slippage then when Collymore was sold again, and then as I said, just turmoil then. But Clough, no, Joe, it wasn't. No one could have believed at the end of the 91-92 season that Brian Clough was in his last 12 months, or that he would get the team relegated. No one could have seen it.
Right. Fascinating. Listen, we're out of time. That was great, and enjoy the 4th round. Well,
yeah, it's funny. We'll try and enjoy it. Yeah.
Who did you get in the 4th round? Leicester, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, we got Leicester. I mean, it's funny. Like Enda McAvoy, who you'll know, he texted me back and he said, geez, is it 1979 again? And I was able to say to him straight up, no, because Arsenal beat us in the FA Cup 1-0. It's still that ingrained. We lost the FA Cup, but we won the European Cup. I don't think we're going to win the European Cup, but we take the FA Cup for even the 4th round, and we'll enjoy the spin and hopefully get back up with the big boys, because it's a cliche, but I think Forest would add to the Premier League. It's built. It's literally built. Like the City Ground hosted Euro 96 games. Forest is a big like, so it'd be bloody brilliant if they got back up.
Kieran Shannon of the Irish Examiner. Thanks so much, Kieran. Appreciate it.
Okay, thanks, Joe.